I love doing this. Simple truth. I just enjoy doing the podcast. I did a few about Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, about Lamrim, and I realized in September when I was doing them, it's such a difficult subject, and I know so little about it, and I'm not qualified as a teacher. And yet, last Saturday came along, and it was what they call Je Tsong Kapa Day, or the feast, the celebration of the parinirvana of Je Tsong Kapa. And I'll try and unpack that for you. Tsong Kapa was a philosopher in the 1400s, died in the early 1500s in Tibet. And he's credited with rejuvenating the philosophical tradition in Tibet. It had been Buddhist for a couple of hundred years at that stage, and he rejuvenated it. So he was a real big, famous scholar. He's credited with the fact that he's the start of the Gelugpa tradition. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the word correctly, Gelugpa school. They're also called the Yellow Hats. So if you see Tibetan Buddhist monks with those strange yellow hats that look like a lemon you'd put in your gin and tonic, that's the Gelugpa school. And it's a particular tradition that emphasized particular style in their philosophy. No different than you get in philosophical traditions in the West or anywhere else. And there eventually, I think, ended up like there was 5 major schools of philosophy, traditions in Tibet. The Gelugpa school was started by Tsong Kapa, and the current Dalai Lama would be the main person in that tradition. And that's why we know about it in the West. And the person I speak about a lot, the Panchen Otrul Rinpoche, who lives in West Cavan, in Jampaling, Tibetan Buddhist Centre in Jampaling, he would be a very close friend of the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama would have known him since the two of them were children. And the pair of them would be, at a certain time, they would have been the most famous lamas, monks in Tibet. The Dalai Lama, the Panchen Lama. You'd hear the Dalai Lama being called, the 15th or the 14th reincarnation. So it's like the lineage goes back. The Dalai Lama dies, doesn't really die. They'd say he releases himself from this mortal life, this mortal coil, and he finds another reincarnation. He chooses to come back because as a bodhisattva, he has this deep wish in his psyche, in his consciousness, to bring all living sentient beings to enlightenment. And so he keeps coming back for us, if you like. This is infinite compassion, immeasurable compassion. That's the kind of idea. Please remember, we're only talking a poetry here. But the fact that we're talking a poetry doesn't mean it's less true. It means it's true in a deeper way than scientific truth. In a different way than scientific truth. I would say a deeper way than scientific truth. But it is poetry. So steady yourself for all this colourful language and all these colourful ideas. So, okay, we have the Dalai Lama, reincarnated 14 or 15 times, choosing to come back out of pure compassion. And therefore he is the complete manifestation of all love. This is not, an idea about God, which is something that doesn't come into the conversation in Tibetan Buddhism. It's more like the energy and power and ground of being in the universe is so all-pervasive, is so manifest in everything, that you can't objectify it. Because if you objectified it and talked about a God, you'd be talking about something that was outside the universe. And that same distinction, funny enough, is made in the Christian tradition. We've got into the habit of talking about God, but if you really get down deep into the early fathers of the church in the desert, the monastic system, they all make very clear, and the councils, all those councils that they used to have in early Christian centuries, 3rd and 4th and 5th century, all those councils make clear that You might be able to experience some sort of energy of God, but God is that which you cannot experience, really. That, God in its essence, in his essence, in her essence, it transcends everything, and yet is in everything. So you can see why it's very, very close to the Buddhist disposition of experiencing all being as enlightened, but they don't name it. They don't name it as God. And you find that in the Christian tradition, they weren't naming it as God either. They were always saying, don't really name it as God. It's one of the reasons why in the Jewish tradition they never spoke the name of God, because the word embodied the reality. You said a word, the thing that's in the word comes into being, and so the actual name of God you didn't say. And you have Moses looking at the burning bush and saying, who are you? And from the bush comes the voice that says, I am who am. It's like I have no name. It is just, this is being. This is all being is here. And stepping into that being in myself is the journey of life for me, to awaken into being here. Just as simple as that. Just awakening into being here. Because here is everywhere. Here is eternal. Underneath everything is this presence that is one presence that is being. Don't call it God for a minute. Let's think about it in terms of the Buddhist narrative just for a minute now. So this sense of being manifests in its essence of compassion. It gathers itself together and expresses itself through the Dalai Lama. So a single monk becomes the source of everything, the kind of focal point of compassion. Because in Buddhist philosophy, we are not completely bound into time. We're not bound into the period from our birth to our death. While we're here, while we're alive, we experience ourselves as transcendent. We experience a part of ourselves that is outside time, that's observing time. Time passes, things happen, we watch ourselves moving through time, and yet there's part of us eternally watching. Even as we change, it watches. We are aware and awake. We know we are here. So we are outside linear time. We are always eternally here, present. Here before we were born, here after we were born. So the next deduction is that there's some cycle of reincarnation, some cycle of purifying ourselves to fully awakened being. And that each time we get pulled down by our own propensity, appetites for things, attachments, things we hate and things we love, those are the chains that link us to temporality, to being in time, what they call samsara. Samsara. Just a soup, the ocean of this soup of time passing, all the stuff of material life. And we get attached to it either by loving it or by hating it. They're both attachments. And then when we go into that period after death, the bardo they call it, we're journeying in a very confused place. Maybe we haven't done enough meditation. Maybe our sense of being present is not strong enough to cope with the strange energies, lights, emotions, noises, sounds, smells that all start to erupt as our physical body decays and disintegrates in the last few days of our life, and the last few days or the few days after our death, our passing, and we can't handle it, and we start to clutch for what makes us secure, and so we return, we rediscover another way of being in time because we find security in it. And if our actions follow us like a shadow, that means in this moment of the bardo, the propensity will be to find an embodiment that properly manifests the karmic emotions that I have been indulging in for 70 years. If I've been indulging in a real kind of angry karma, just getting up every morning and being angry from one year to the next. The danger is that in the bardo, the time after death, my whole energy will try and grasp something similar. I'll be reborn as something angry. Now, I couldn't tell you again because I'm not a scholar, so there's huge nuances in this sort of idea of reincarnation that a Tibetan or Buddhist philosopher would explain to you. You know, it's not all directly like, well, I'm angry in this life, so I become something angry in the next life. Sometimes they would suggest there are modifications, that one thing creates the opposite sometimes. That what you're longing for you become. Or sometimes what you abuse you become. Huge complexity in the philosophy of Tibet when they're talking about something like reincarnation. And I always remember, and I've told this story before, but I love it. It's a story of, I was at a teaching one time, and my teacher, the Rinpoche, was talking, and when he was finished his lecture, he said, any questions? And there was one young man, and he was a really enthusiastic student. And he really wanted, unconsciously, he really was not just a student, he wanted to let everybody know he was a student, and a good student, and a very advanced student. So he put up his hand and he said, there's a lot of people here today, Rinpoche, who are here for the first time, and they're hearing about Buddhism for the first time, and a lot of them have difficulties with reincarnation. Perhaps you could explain it a little bit to them. And of course, unconsciously, he was kind of saying, the subtext was, like, I know what reincarnation is about. I'm a very advanced student of philosophy, but these people here wouldn't be as advanced as me, so maybe you should explain this to them. He was being patronizing, he was being unconscious, he was being naive, he was just being a young person. And Rinpoche just laughed, at the idea maybe you should explain it to them. And Rinpoche said, well, maybe it's not true. And it confounded, of course, the diligent student, but it relaxed everybody else because they felt, well, that's a relief, because maybe I'm enjoying a certain amount of Buddhism that lets me meditate, lets me relax, lets me be in the present moment. But if you're going to talk gobbledygook about reincarnating and coming back as a monkey and coming back as a donkey, I can't take that sort of poetic language. You're pushing me too far. And some of the very flowery language of Tibetan Buddhism, the same as the flowery language of medieval Catholicism, is not for everybody. It's not for everybody. The meditations of, we'll say, Saint Teresa of Avila on the crucified Christ and her sense of closeness and union with Christ, some of her meditations are not for everybody. They would be seen by a lot of people as too flowery to take seriously. And that's why I suppose they get dismissed, although you just keep reminding yourself that people like Carl Jung, great psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, and all sorts of other extraordinary major thinkers and philosophers of the 20th century would acknowledge Saint Teresa of Avila as a mighty, mighty and amazing philosopher. So it's true in Tibetan Buddhism as well that a lot of this stuff can be flowery. And it creates a problem for me sharing it with you because on the one hand, I don't have the authority and I don't know enough about it to be even talking about subjects like the bardo, the time after death, or samsara, the kind of temporal soup of material existence. I don't have the language, the words, the education. I've been a student of Tibetan Buddhism merely by enjoying the presence of the Rinpoche, just going for weekends, just stopping a few hours with him and feeling this human being is so precious because I can sense the vibrations of his love. And for me, as a man, to have an older man, he'd be not that much older than me, I suppose, but maybe a little bit. For a man to have somebody as a mentor, it's so important. Certainly in my life, always I can look back on those mentors. I remember when in my early 20s, I was 21 years of age, I was teaching in West Cavan, and I knocked on the door of a man called Robin Ritchie. And Robin Ritchie was Church of Ireland priest. Now, my background was Roman Catholic, but I went to Reverend Robin Ritchie and sat with him a few times. And I listened to his wisdom, his sense of insight about being a Christian and being a minister, and I experienced his gentleness and the gentility of him and his wife, his partner, his beloved. And when you're at a young age, something like that really opens you up. Really gave me an insight into, I suppose, not just faith and spirituality, but even the sense of faith and priesthood incorporated within a marriage. Here was a man who's so gentle a husband, so loving, a member of that couple, and a devout priest. And he was so quiet. He was so quiet and gentle as a priest. He didn't shout his presence. And for years afterwards, when I was on the artistic road and I'd be maybe launching books or doing readings from books, or maybe, with a play that was touring, and we'd bring it to, Black Lion or Sligo or somewhere, and you'd always find Reverend Ritchie in the audience, quietly, and I would feel he was quietly supporting me by being present. Maybe that's one of the most important things young people need from somebody my age. It's not to be telling them things. It's not even to be lecturing, when I was your age, this is what I did and all the rest of it. Maybe it's just being present. It's like they can go to an older man, like they can stand under a big chestnut tree. Just be there. The chestnut tree will teach you everything if you just stand under it for long enough. And they used to say, the old monks in the 2nd, 3rd century in the Egyptian desert would say, go to your room, your cell, your hut, your shed. Go to your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. I have a cell. It's a shed. It's a very high quality shed. It's well built. I come in here every morning when I'm around and when I'm in the mood for work, and I come in here and I close the door, and I've been doing that for a long number of years, over a decade, and in the 15 or 20 years before then, I had a smaller shed in the same place. And sometimes the solitary room was in Dublin when I lived in Dublin. Sometimes it was in East Galway, in Skehana. But there was always, I suppose from 1984 onwards, there was always a shed, a cell, a space where I could go and be alone for 1 or 2 hours and reflect. That's what I learned to do in the Christian tradition. I don't feel I got any ideology from Christianity. I don't think it poisoned my mind. It certainly gave me some ideas that opened my mind. After all, I was 21 when I was a teacher. I was sitting in the library with Reverend Ritchie. I was only 21. And I was exploring with him the possibility, could I possibly find my way as a priest? And he encouraged me, and was so wise in guiding me in those few meetings I had with him that I remember when I was ordained a priest, and they would say to you, who would you like to be on the altar with the bishop in the big event? I said, Reverend Ritchie. He was a Church of Ireland priest, but there he was, shoulder to shoulder with my Roman Catholic bishop, because he was my spiritual director in a certain way at a certain time. And that was the mood of the church at the time. Again, 1980s, 1981. So the mood of the church was very, very ecumenical at that time. It probably isn't so much now. But what I got from him was just being in his presence. And it's exactly the same thing years later when I met the Panchen Otrul Rinpoche, the Panchen Otrul Lama. Sometimes I say Panchen Otrul Lama, it means Lama is the monk. And Panchen, the Panchen is like wisdom, so the Dalai Lama is the embodiment of compassion. The Panchen Lama is the embodiment of wisdom. And wisdom and compassion are the two great pillars of Buddhist ideas, Buddhist philosophy. Wisdom is that sense of being alone in your shed, alone in your room, that sense of discernment, that sense of being in meditation, letting go of all the disturbing emotions and be, calm abiding is a phrase they use. I like that phrase, calm abiding. Just that you're abiding in the present moment in a calmness. And that's a lovely place to be. It's one of the greatest gifts you can ever get is to experience some kind of peace. Some kind of peace is everything in life. No matter how old, how young, how well, how sick, if you can find just that moment of calm abiding. And that is what they would call, the beginning of wisdom. It's one of the 6 perfections in Buddhism. And in fact, it's the most important of the 6 perfections. And don't ask me to name the other ones. There's concentration, which is good. Concentration is kind of the effort you put into being alone in your shed or in your room or in your meditation space. And there's generosity and there's patience and there's diligence. And that's 5 of them. And I've just forgotten one for the minute. The 6 perfections. So those 6 perfections culminate in wisdom. Realizations. Not understandings so much of the brain. Not rational conclusions. But a different type of knowing. And the different type of knowing is, in English I noticed they use the word realizations, to realize something. It's a deeper, it kind of implies accepting it, embracing it. So to some extent it's like love. Very, very similar again to, let's say, early Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, where they talk about the nous. The nous, that sense of knowing at the level of loving. Your rational mind begins to move. Your consciousness moves from rational, logical reason into the heart, and you begin to relate to what's around you and to the people around you in a loving way. This is the nous. It's so similar to Buddhist sense of compassion and wisdom. And just as I would, find that the chestnut tree awakens me if I stay with it long enough, if I go to the one room for long enough, be alone at a regular basis, I will awaken. You will awaken. You will awaken. If you go into the room alone, you will awaken. The room in your house, the little corner of the room, the little armchair looking out on the window where you feed the birds. Go to your place, your special place. And you will awaken, because this will happen on the outside. When I sit here in this room, the room is all around me on the outside. It's outside my body. I'm looking out the window now. I'm looking at the ceiling now. I'm looking at the rafters. This is my space. But the more I come into this space that affords me solitude or isolation, there's a kind of a room opens up inside me. It's that room of the heart. So room inside you. Am I being too flowery? I don't think so. I think you're still with me, because we can get that there's a room inside us. We go in there and we can live on the inside. We kind of become loving on the inside. And then it kind of seeps outwards. It's like light coming out from the heart, not coming in to us from God's, but actually we as sources of energy sending our light out to other people, sending vibrations, you might say, out to others. So I stand under a tree or I come into a room, I experience this sense of solitude, and it's very, very peaceful, very, very calm. And that's what I get from a teacher. With Reverend Robin Ritchie, I was just in his presence. There was other great teachers in my life. I'll not go into them now because it would sidetrack me, but the one I wanted to talk about was Rinpoche. Rinpoche means, it's like an affectionate term the same way as maybe, we'd say in English, Holy Father, or It really means blessed one. I think it means like blessed one, holy one. Rinpoche. It's used affectionately. You know, Alana, you know the way they say in Irish, to say it to a child, Alana, or a Haji, or a Chuishla, or a Gra Macree, Rinpoche, blessed one. So a lot of Buddhist teachers now, Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and they give classes and they give lectures, and sometimes it can be very, very orientated towards intellectual stuff, so that you can get lost again in Buddhism, lost in a whole web of convoluted ideas that are not really touching you. And if I was to describe how Rinpoche, this particular man in Cavan, if I was to describe how wonderful he has been in my life, it's that he has, I think, taught all his students through silence. He doesn't say much. Yes, he gives talks, he gives lectures, he gives weekends, tirelessly. And he travels to India, and he has students in India, in a monastery there, and he travels to Mongolia every year nearly. But it's actually that he's such a quiet person, such a shy person, such a non-verbal person. So you go and sit with him, you go over, and this all happened before there was COVID, and now COVID has made this very difficult. So that's heartbreaking for a lot of people who would like to go to centres like Jampaling and to churches and to retreat centres, and they can't. I feel terrible about that. But anyway, in the old days before COVID, you might go over to Jampaling, spend a day there, and you might be having lunch, and Rinpoche would happen to be at the table. And rather than be dominating the table and, you know, asking you where do you come from and who are you and all the rest of it, he'd be there like the quietest little person at the table. And in his quietness, you'd feel this energy coming at you. I can't explain it. But somebody's presence can lift you if they have a good energy. They don't have to say anything. You know that you're in the presence of somebody who's a good, positive energy. You know it. You realize it. You can feel it like the energy of a tree. So that's the Panchen. The Panchen Lama is the Lama of wisdom. The Dalai Lama, the Lama of compassion. They are the two great pillars of Tibetan Buddhism. One is about the meditation session. One is about the solitude and being in your room, having a space in the house, having some place you go regularly to reflect and to meditate and to practice whatever kind of meditation you want. It might be mindfulness in a very modern secular way. It might be whatever, it doesn't matter. Could be Islamic, could be a Sufi mantra, it could be a Christian rosary, it doesn't matter. But to activate the dynamic of prayerfulness within you in a way that suits you, in a way that you're not swallowing the dogmas of either Buddhism or Christianity, because the dogma of Buddhism, the dogma of Christianity, if you swallow it like without chewing it, it's as bad for you as swallowing bread without chewing it. You'll choke yourself. You'll kill yourself. It has to be chewed. And the way you chew dogma is just live your life. Gradually some things will become apparent and others won't. You could live an entire life and never be able to say anything positive about the concept of reincarnation. It could seem gobbledygook at the beginning, and at the very end of your life it could seem gobbledygook. Same applies to ideas about God. You know, God is only a word. Like, it's only a word, you know. Religion, all the dogmas of Christianity, they're only language, and sometimes you chew a little bit of it and you swallow it and you feel enriched by it, but other times you don't. Don't worry about that. Just go for the real experience of being present, being here now. And when you're here now, in the solitude of your own little room, in the room inside your heart, but also some space in the house or outside the house or in the corner of the garden or wherever, you have a space. And you go there and you have a good time just being there, just being present. Now, that you'd call the meditation session. That's where realizations surface. They're the moments where the poet finds a poem. Seamus Heaney found poems surfacing in those moments. He went into those spaces, whether they were in his house or in his cottage in Wicklow or wherever. He went to find his space where he could sit like a fisherman and allow realizations, beautiful lines of poetry to surface. That's what we all do in that beautiful silence. Musicians find music. Lovers find love. They find the capacity to love. And that's a beautiful kind of use of the meditation space. So it's not about acquiring dogmas, or it's not about like, what am I doing in this space? I think it's some Christian monk in the 2nd or 3rd century would have said, like, if you think you're meditating, you're not meditating. Because the minute you actually say, oh, I'm meditating now, you're not really, you're thinking about it. Being, there was a line I used to use, I remember years ago when I'd be going swimming in Inishgrone, and the child was young at the time. She was 2 or 3 years of age. And, well, I was a father for the first time in my 40s, and so I wasn't so good at it. I was never good at it, but I was really very poor at it at that stage. So by the time you'd get to Inishgrone 2 hours away in the old banger of a car with a child in the back and the baby seat in the back, you'd be stressed out. And I always used to have a time in the day. There might be 3 of us, and there might have been 6 or 7 because there was another family. We used to always go together. So it'd be kind of hectic. And it'd be all focused around the little babies. But I used to always find a time where I'd go for my swim. And my swim would be like when everybody else maybe had done their stuff and swimming. And then I'd just slip away, and I'd have maybe half an hour, and I'd go into the waves. Beautiful turquoise blue sky in the afternoon on a clear day. Turquoise, with the sun like a lantern, kind of an orange lantern sometimes, in the evening, late in the evening in June. And I'd go into the water. I used to use the phrase, relax in alaya. Now, I didn't know what alaya was. It was a word that I found in a Buddhist book. And in some way it meant kind of the way that all being holds you. That kind of, there's an enlightened consciousness underneath everything. And where it's not yet conscious, it's like just not purified itself enough. But the destiny for all of us is to belong in this unity, this oneness with water, with fish, with air, with fire, with sea, with other humans, with babies, with old people, with animals, badgers and cats and dogs, all together, purifying ourselves into pure spirit, that we are one, single, alaya. I would lie back. I would fall backwards. I couldn't swim at the time, but I could float. So I would fall backwards into the water. And as I'd be falling back into the water just to float, I would say, relax in alaya. Now, I could have used a Christian prayer, a Buddhist prayer, an Islamic prayer. I could have been saying, may God hold me up. I could have been saying any kind of prayer. But the dynamic of what I was doing was the important thing. The language I used was incidental. I didn't even know what the word alaya meant. But I knew what I was doing. I was experiencing being. I was taking time out from the surface, from the samsara, from the busy rush of life. I was taking time out from it and experiencing my identity as just a mystical presence. I am present unto myself in a way that seems it's outside time and will transcend time. Now the Panchen Lama, the embodiment of wisdom. The Dalai Lama, embodiment of compassion. So the meditation time is that space where you relax with alaya, where you go and find yourself awakening as you are alone. And just be. Don't even try to meditate. Just be there. Under the tree. And compassion is what you do between the meditation sessions. Simple as that. Your meditation session might be once every 2 years. Your meditation session might be every morning. A great place that people used for meditation was the Catholic Church. The Catholics used it. on a daily basis, because there used to be daily mass, and they would go for 10 o'clock, let's say, and sometimes they'd say the rosary at 9:45 with a little group, and then the mass would go on. And it was a ritual, and it was profound and meaningful and lasted for 2,000 years, and there you'd see them. And I sometimes would go in at the back of that space, and I would kneel in the back pew, and I would feel a tremendous energy in the space, just that sacred space, so powerful for creating inner space. The sacred space physically outside just opens up your inside, and you begin to experience yourself in an inner area of space. Relax in alaya, the presence of God. Be here now. It's all the same, different words, but that's the meditation session, and between meditation sessions, compassion. Equally as important, 2 pillars. So am I being compassionate with my children, with my wife, with my husband, with my partner, with my parents, with my little cat, with my dogs, with my horses, with the foxes, with the wild birds? Am I being compassionate? Am I being compassionate to the environment that is hurting, that is wounded? And am I being compassionate to the poor and the lonely? Am I reaching out? And then you're back into the meditation. So there's your basic 2 pillars of Buddhism in Tibet. One is compassion, and one is meditation, wisdom. Now let's go back just finally to Tsong Kapa, Je Tsong Kapa. This is the monk in the 1400s, 1500s, who really sharpened up the whole philosophy of Buddhism in order to make it simple and easy to teach people. And Lamrim is the word given to the teachings that he arranged. It's called the steps of the path, is a way to talk about it. Simply the steps of the path. You just take these steps. Be here now. You have to be ready for the teachings in any religion. And there's a time. There's a time for it, and there's a time for staying away from it. There's a time that you can eat the bread and swallow it, and it'll benefit you because you can chew it. And there's another time you need to stay away from it or it'll choke you. Same with religious dogma. You can't force feed somebody religion or dogma, but you can invite the whole world into the present moment. There's a magpie at the moment sitting on the top of an ash tree outside my window in the present moment, and being with him is like being with a teacher. And you can do the same. Magpie outside your window is today your teacher. Simple as that. I've tried in this to say something about Tsong Kapa, and to say something about how that teacher started the Gelugpa school, how it relates to the teacher that I have, how it relates back to the Buddha. I've tried to share some of these ideas about Tibetan Buddhism and how I experience Tibetan Buddhism. It's not really that I'm a teacher, because I'm not a scholar and I don't know what I'm talking about. And you could be listening to me and you'd have far more understanding of these things than me. So it's not even the ideas that I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing the act of kind of reciting these things. You know, I'm saying these things. It's sharing the time with you. It's sharing the sense of presence with you. To me, that's always the way with teachings, whether they're Christian or whether they're Buddhist. If I sit with a teacher and they're talking stuff, right, about reincarnation or some esoteric idea about heaven or whatever. It's not the content of what they're saying that matters. It's that they're saying it means we're connected. There's a sense of love flows between two people when they share ideas. It's not the ideas, the disembodied ideas that actually matter. It is that they care enough for each other to share, or, on your side, to listen. So you may say, sometimes, I get little notes, thank you for such and such a podcast. But can you imagine how deeply grateful I feel that you're listening? Your listening is not neutral. Your listening is not of no consequence. And I thank you for being here and for listening. Even if you're alone, I hope you feel the love of other people around you. And the love that is in trees, sentient beings, all life. I hope you feel that we all stand in the one ground of being, in the one singularity of love. Not of knowing, but a singularity of love. Thank you, and happy Christmas.